Birthright citizenship is a foundational piece. The next domino would be calling into question people who are already citizens. Like you called this exactly, that if a person is identified as an immigrant, that their citizenship should be taken away. But they're including people who are just like Muslim Americans. There's an actual bill that's called the Scam Act. This only targets people who are immigrants, who are naturalized US citizens, and then later on commit certain crimes, that those certain crimes could then lead to a denaturalization process and their citizenship could be revoked. Citizenship is a bedrock foundational piece of the social contract, and creating a situation where the government can pick and choose who's in the contract and who's not after they're already in is a very different thing than just saying, okay, well, who gets in the first place?
Okay, Nate, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are going to shout into the void, and we are going to be talking about a very important legal situation and discourse. And thank you so much for coming through and being with me on this journey.
No, of course. And as always, I begged you, not the other way around. I keep coming back because there's just not many places to talk about these things, Pisco. I'm not going to lie. Even amongst our attorney colleagues, there's just not many people to talk to about this stuff.
Yeah, everyone wants to focus on billables and their clients, and no one takes the time to step back and smell the roses and black pill and doom scroll on Republican Twitter. And if they do that, they don't want to talk about it at work. So I understand that.
No, that's what we're dealing with. And then on top of all of that, the since we spoke last, the Trump administration decided that launching into a war that they were unable to handle was a good idea, and we're just barely now starting to see some of the really negative consequences of that. And so things are moving, and this is not what's on people's minds, but it is what's on my mind.
Yeah, no, I'm hoping near the end of our conversation, maybe we can touch into the war because I want to sort of pick your brain on it. It might
Okay.
seem very sort of distinct to what we're planning to talk about today, and maybe what we talked about in the previous encounter. For those of you guys who don't remember, Nate is a lawyer, a fellow lawyer who has a robust immigration practice. And last we spoke, we were talking about birthright citizenship. I really encourage you guys to go watch that video if you haven't, and if you end up liking what we're about to do. It was very well received by the people who watched it and who gave it a chance, and people really enjoyed it. It has like one of my highest like ratios. So the people who watched it, who like the legal stuff, you're gonna like that one. And Nate, of course, is a great person to talk to. But the way in which I think the war is related has to do with questions of power, certainly. And anytime you start talking about war, it's gonna invoke or call to people's minds different authorities that the government might use to go after people or potentially to protect the country from the enemy. And in fact, there are laws related to immigration that specifically invoke this, like the Alien Enemies Act. So I do think that there's some relation in terms of the overall perspective of the administration and potentially what justification they'll have to invoke for future exercises of immigration authority. But I'll give you a word on that and then introduce the topic.
Yeah, no, I think that's right, and I also think that the right wing talkosphere, like the online spaces, they are really trying to find a message that makes sense of this war. It's not going well, like, right? I mean, they're all over the place right now. This is a China thing. This is like they're just everywhere. But one of and so the temptation then is to go focus on something that's the tried and true, and then try to make a tiny connection back to the
Yeah.
war as sort of a way to distract. And I think one of the things that caught my attention was the number of GOPers who are in office, senators, members of the House, government officials who are using the war as an excuse to try to go after Muslim Americans right now. They're going after more Americans than just Muslim Americans, but I think the Muslim Americans are very much in the bullseye of the administration at the moment, and that's one of the reasons why this denaturalization thing has come up and has got me all fired up. I'm very disappointed about this.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a great transition there. And one last point on that, with respect to the war, a lot of the discourse is focused on both sides on this issue of loyalty, which we also
Yeah.
examined loyalty and allegiance in the previous conversation. But in the context of the discourse, it's like you're loyal to Israel, do loyalty to Israel, or someone will say you're being disloyal to America by giving these talking points that are bad for the administration and bad vis-a-vis Iran, and so you're just doing Iran's handiwork. There's this conversation about Tucker Carlson potentially he claiming that he's going to be wrapped up in some issue related to being an agent of Iran or a foreign
Yes.
power or something. So these conversations about loyalty are embedded in this notion of like who's your allegiance to, and whether or not you are part of this community, and whether you owe allegiance to it.
One other thing that I'll mention, and you said this in our previous conversation, is birthright citizenship is a foundational piece, but it's the next domino would be calling into question people who are already citizens. Like you called this exactly, and you said as soon as these loyalty tests become the grounds by which your citizenship comes into question, they'll start to look to denaturalize people. And I mean, we haven't even gotten that decision back yet, and they've already started moving on to the next piece. And so I do think that these things are connected.
Yeah, no doubt. And on the immigration front of it, there's a more coherent strategy, more coherent vision than perhaps on the war front. The people who are
Yeah.
running, immigration, they have an idea ideologically behind a lot of what they're doing. And even though it might seem on some fronts with respect to their negotiations with the Democrats, oh, we're gonna assure that we're not gonna deport citizens. We're not gonna arrest citizens unless we see them doing a crime or something like that. Of course, the question is more foundational than that. Who is a
Yes.
citizen, and can we take that protection away? Last point I have to mention: we eventually we're going to have our Nazi conversation, Nazi jurist conversation.
Oh
But
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'll note someone who's making the rounds specifically on this war is a historian by the name of Timothy Snyder. He wrote Bloodlands, this book about a geographical look at the killings in Poland and Ukraine that occurred. Timothy Snyder, and one thing that he noted in the context of the Holocaust is when deaths occurred of Jews or of targets, they occurred where places where the state broke down. Places where the state broke down didn't occur as much in France or in some of these other countries where the institutions maintain themselves. And where you see the most killings, it's when the Soviets took over, destroyed the state, then the Nazis took over and destroyed what was left, and there was no protections, no systems. And where it was a situation in which there were lives that were saved in places where the state broke down, it was usually done through diplomats. And he had a great line, which was, "The passport stopped the bullet. The passport stopped the bullet." That when we're looking at the most vulnerable of our societies, it's when they lose access to the institutions and the state apparatuses. And very often,
Yeah.
those are the sort of liberties granted by citizenship.
Well, that's an interesting insight. I'll have to take a look at
Yeah.
and see. I have seen him before. I haven't heard him speak specifically about this point, but I think that's right. And it becomes a beautiful pretext as soon as somebody is formally outside of the system, then the system has nothing stopping itself from wrecking that person. So all enemies of the Trump administration will be on the table if they have their way. And now we have their roadmap. I mean, we just have a very obvious roadmap now.
Awesome. So introduce us to the topic, and I'll be able to go next on the presentation. So you want me to flip the slide? Just let me know, okay?
Okay, yes, absolutely. That worked out well last time. So yeah, the topic is denaturalization. So taking citizenship away from someone who is a citizen. This specifically, the rhetoric right now is murky. Like the rhetoric by some of these Republicans, which I included a few in the slides. We don't have to go look at those, but the rhetoric is kind of murky. That they're insinuating that if a person is identified as an immigrant, that their citizenship should be taken away. But they're including people who are just like Muslim Americans. So there are 6 and 7 generation Muslim Americans in this country that are as traditional American as anybody. And yet, I think that the rhetoric would indicate at least that these people could have their citizenship stripped. There's an actual bill that's called the Scam Act that's proposed by Senator Schmidt of Missouri. So this is in the Senate. There's another bill in the House by Tom Emmer and some others that looks almost the same. And It is intentionally trying. This only targets people who are immigrants who are naturalized U.S. citizens, and then later on commit certain crimes. That those certain crimes could then lead to a denaturalization process, and their citizenship could be revoked. And so that's, to me, that's as we talked about last time. Citizenship is a bedrock foundational piece of the social contract, and creating situation where the government can pick and choose who's in the contract and who's not after they're already in is a very different thing than just saying, okay, well, who gets in the first place? But now, if the government gets to decide that you get kicked out, obviously, I think that's deeply unconstitutional. The language of the bill, as it sits with the clerk of the Senate right now, this is the pertinent section. There were a couple of other sections that just have to do with mandatory custody. So if somebody gets picked up and is a U.S. citizen, they should be held in custody into perpetuity with no chance at a bond, which is also a troubling part of this bill. But nonetheless, for a U.S. citizen, that's way beyond the pale, but it like shoves them into Section 237 of the INA. And then it gives us this language. Section 340 of the Immigration and Nationality Act is amended by redesignating subsections F, G, and H. Drop down a little bit. It says a conviction of any naturalized U.S. citizen for a criminal offense described in Section 237A. Such court shall A, revoke, set aside, and declare void the final order. And that's important because that's to the third branch of government. So that's not even getting to an immigration judge. That's just saying that at the end of a federal criminal case, that the judge should then just say, oh, and by the way, I'm revoking and declaring void your citizenship. And then also next, it says admitting such person to citizenship, and B, declare the certificate of naturalization of such person to be canceled.
Yeah, canceled.
Canceled, right? So we're canceling citizenship. The crimes that are referred to inside of that subsection have to do with aggravated felonies having to do with fraud. Now, why, Pisco, would Senator Schmidt want to use the fraud language? Because the rhetoric has to do with this incorrect assertion that Somali and African immigrants in particular are likely to commit fraud in the United States.
Yeah, no, I first of all want to back up on a lot of the things that you're saying. The Muslim angle absolutely is there. We're seeing it in the Somali situation and the sort of promotion of a narrative, I would say a racist narrative towards the Somali community in different locations in the country, many of whom have been here now decades, and most of whom do not have any part in like the major fraud that occurred in Minnesota, etc. But you're also seeing it with critics who are Muslim of the war or of Trump himself. Mark Levin, who Trump has recently anointed as, I guess, MAGA incarnate recently, anytime he sees Cenk Uygur, for example, a Muslim naturalized American, commenting on things where Mark disagrees with him, he says, denaturalize, deport, denaturalize, deport. That's also true of people like Hassan Piker, Mehdi Hassan, who are also naturalized citizens. And then on this legal point here, the 237A2. Now, you're an immigration lawyer. This is the U.S. citation for the grounds of deportability. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay.
So, by the way, that's for people who are in Section 237. That means they are a green card holder, have entered the U.S. under a visa. This does not include people who entered without inspection.
Right. So basically, this part of the proposed law, which we both think is unconstitutional, and we'll explain why shortly. But this is trying to use the bases of deportability, or at least one of the bases of deportability, as a grounds to get naturalized citizens at the end of a criminal process, denaturalized and have their citizenship canceled. And one thing to note, even before we get into the strictly speaking constitutional or legal issues, is from a power perspective, you can imagine, we already have a great deal of influence at the plea bargaining stage from the federal government. They have a high conviction rate, and in general are able to manipulate pleas in a very way that's been criticized over the course of in the academy, etc. This would just add an additional level of power that a potential prosecutor could have to leverage over a future defendant. So talk about the legal issues, and you can respond to anything I said.
Yeah, the legal issues are very straightforward. It's this idea that after you've become a citizen through the naturalization process, your citizenship never really vests.
Hmm.
It's always open to revocation after, if this were to become law. It's connected to criminal behavior that happens later. So I saw this first start to come up. I don't know if you recall, but shortly after Khomeini was assassinated in Iran as part of this military operation. We're not calling it a war for for dumb
Yeah.
reasons. This is a war, but there was a shooting in Texas. The shooter had been naturalized as a U.S. citizen. I think he'd been a legal permanent resident for 25 years and a citizen for like 20 or 19, something like that. I don't think he made it into custody. I think he is now deceased. But the conversation was, well, we need to be able to deport this guy, right? So you've been a citizen for 10, 15 years, and now you're deportable, and it creates this clause of conditionality to your citizenship. So if you are not one of the real citizens, right? We just created a two-tiered system.
Citizens, yeah.
If you're right, which is crazy, but this is the idea is that your citizenship is constantly conditional. It's conditional upon, again, I think the Trump administration would say the whims of the president because it's not you're not part of the club permanently. It's a gift from me and I can revoke it at any time. But at least under the law, that they're constantly under threat of having that be taken away. And so certain crimes would trigger this at the sentencing phase. They would be sentenced and have their immigration status canceled or their citizenship canceled.
And it would be conceptually different than, for example, banishment, the old sort of punishment as a result of a crime that would banish a citizen from the realm. This would be saying you're not a member of the realm at all anymore, and
Mhm.
so it's even a more fundamental, I don't know, deprivation.
Yeah, it is. It's a fundamental attack on our relationship with the government. And your point that you made again on our last conversation, I thought was good that this is the direction in which the administration and the right wing, talkosphere is going to go because they would like to make all of it conditional. I think this is just the next domino, which is go after the naturalized citizens. Why not just the native born citizens, which they don't really believe in anyway?
Yeah,
Right? Like it's only a matter of time before this just seeps out to everybody.
and it really is a bottleneck through which a lot of rights are sort of located in the American context is this notion of citizenship. Let me push back a little bit, even though I don't truly believe all this. Okay, someone might say to you, Nate, fine, you can say that this is bad or whatever, but you can't say that it's legally problematic because look, in the Constitution itself, it creates a two-tiered citizenship system. There is at least one thing that natural-born citizens are allowed to do that, uh, that natural-born citizens are able to do that naturalized citizens cannot, and that is, for example, assume the office of president. And so it's not that weird that there could be different sort of protections for different citizens. Your response?
Yeah, I think that it's one thing to say that there are certain privileges, like not all of us have the right to be president of the United States. I think that certain privileges, well, first of all, I would say I actually think that that's a bad part of the Constitution. That's stupid. Like, if
I
you're a
agree.
citizen, I don't understand like why. Like it is correct to say that the Constitution, especially at the time of its signing, without any amendments, did a whole bunch of things that today we would be like, oh, geez, that doesn't make any sense. This is one of those. There's also like we're age bound, right?
Yeah,
There's like weird age limits and like there's a bunch of other stuff that's in there. And none of those things to me, those seem like very logistic ideas. They're not supposed to be creating these broader categories that have meaning outside of just the logistical purpose in front of us. What's the logistical purpose? Well, the concern was, especially at the time of an open border situation, where becoming a citizen
it
was like very easy.
it was
If
loyalty,
you just
wasn't
showed
it?
up, yeah, right. So in an environment of true open borders, and if you're white and can own property, you become a citizen, you would have this belief, the specter, that a foreign agent could come and infiltrate our system, become the president, and then surreptitiously wreck our country or bring us back to England or something, right?
And to be
Um,
clear, most of our presidents have been um, English speakers as their first language, but I think Martin Van Buren, someone will correct me if I'm wrong about this, was his first language was Dutch. I think that that's true, but yeah, that absolutely was a concern. The framers were very concerned about foreign infiltration at the time, and so notwithstanding the foundations, equality before the law, all that stuff, all the great Jeffersonian ideals that were not perfectly practiced at the founding, there is this little thing about the president. But my response to that, and it's kind of in line with you, is this is the exception that proves the rule. This is the kind of situation of the exceptions to the natural birth, the birthright citizenship common law rule that we established before, the children of invaders, the children of ambassadors, the American Indian context, that in any situation, there's going to be an exception that proves the rule. There's always going to be this little doctrine, what if you get citizenship through fraud? What if you, do we really want them to be president? And so I would say, okay, fine. That's the one area where the Constitution sets out a particular difference. And maybe we should read into the fact that the Constitution has to spell that out, that the assumption is on all other terms, citizens should be equal.
Well, and that's a good point where we could start to roll into the case law, because the Supreme Court, when they've looked at these issues, which has not been very often, there's not a lot of cases on this. But when the Supreme Court looks at this, their first initial intellectual jumping off point is, we're going to be very hesitant to allow the federal government to dissolve the bond that connects it to the citizenry. Because if that is a power that is clearly outside of the congressional purview. So there have been laws written in the past that would allow you to be denaturalized, even if you were a native-born person. And so the Supreme Court immediately looks at this and says, this seems very dangerous to open this up. And they basically narrowed Congress's authority for denaturalization to what the law is today, which is, if you lied on your citizenship application, we can reopen your citizenship application and say you lied to us, and therefore we're going to denaturalize you. And even in those circumstances, the government carries basically the same burden that they would in a criminal trial in order to prove the elements that you did in fact lie, that the lie was intentional, and that you were trying to hide important information from the U.S. government at the time of the lie, not just oops, I screwed this up, I'm so sorry. Like, that's not grounds for getting your citizenship revoked. And I think that the Supreme Court's viewing of this is just very straightforward, that once you're in the social contract, the federal government doesn't get to renegotiate the relationship that it has with you. Yeah. Yep. That's exactly it. And I think that's just a very basic, easy idea. Again, it's so obvious to me that that's the case that I think that this is mostly just pretext. Again, I think that what's lurking in the background is we're just trying to find, the ethno-nats, the right-wing traditionalists, we're trying to find explanations and theories that help us get tools so we can remake the country in a way that we want. This isn't really about any sort of other underlying structure to the Constitution or anything like that.
All right. Zooming back in. So we have these guys, they're proposing these laws, they have these goals. Let's continue. Why can't they do this? What does the Constitution say? And please continue with your presentation.
Okay, yeah, just go to the next slide. We'll just dive into a Supreme Court case. So this one is, I don't know how to say some of these names. So
Schneiderman.
I think this is Schneiderman.
Yeah.
B-U-S. Court ruled in favor of William Schneiderman, a Communist Party member. So I liked this one because you can see it's from 1943. It's at a time of war. Communism and fascism are very much top of mind. And this person, Schneiderman, is a communist. He's not like an alleged communist. He's a communist. And his U.S. citizenship and emphasizing stringent proof requirements for revoking naturalization. This is the quote from the court. Quote, "But such a right, once conferred, should not be taken away without the clearest sort of justification and proof. So whatever may be the rule in a naturalization proceeding, in an action instituted under Section 15, that law no longer exists, by the way, for the purpose of depriving one of the precious right of citizenship previously conferred, we believe the facts in the law should be construed as far as is reasonably possible in favor of the citizen. Especially is this so when the attack is made long after the time when the certificate of citizenship was granted and the citizen has meanwhile met his obligations and has committed no act of lawlessness." So, of course, in this particular case, there was no underlying crime. So I could already hear an
Yeah.
apologist for some of this
Look at the
nonsense.
dicta here. The committed no act of lawlessness. Yeah.
Don't worry, the court will come back to that in a minute.
Yeah.
But at least out of 1943, the idea was like, hey, having political speech absolutely cannot be grounds for the revocation of your citizenship.
And that would
And
potentially be a
Schneiderman,
separate First Amendment issue as well. So I just want to
yes,
analytically distinguish this for the audience, that there's the issue of, well, can we even have the power to take away citizenship as a substantive point? So that's one issue. But a second issue might be, well, assuming that we can in a given context, can we do so on the basis of First Amendment speech or in a way that would offend First Amendment principles? And so the analytically distinct ways to possibly get to the same answer.
yeah, and how would we analytically get to these answers? Let's say for a minute that the law went into effect, and so now you're a district court judge at the federal level. There's a jury trial for the criminal elements, right? But there's no jury trial for the canceling of citizenship. Could that be a deprivation on other grounds inside of the Constitution? Could that be a deprivation of liberty in a different way? And I think the answer could be yes. It's also fascinating. How would the federal judge make the determination, right? Like,
Yeah.
I guess you'd have to have a small evidentiary hearing directly to the judge. The government would have to produce a copy of the naturalization certificate. They'd have to produce evidence that they weren't born in the US somehow. You know what I mean? Like, it just
Yeah.
gets weird.
No,
Like, what does that hearing even look like?
I totally agree. But there's one aspect to this that I think the court. Listen, what do I know? I don't know better than the Supreme Court, but this is my view. I think that the court might be wrong here in the following
Okay.
way. Is it true to say that citizenship is a right? I don't know that this should be viewed from a rights perspective, at least the aspect of taking citizenship away. Now, ultimately, there might be a goal to get rid of
Sure.
someone's rights down the end, but those are the rights that attend to citizenship, such as the right to reside in the country. That's a right. It's a right for citizens against the government. Maybe it's because, whatever reason, you want to take away this person's right to vote. But that's the right to vote, which is applied to citizens. I would, and again, who am I? I would almost view this from a powers perspective. Congress has the power to naturalize, and that's what it says, establish the rules for naturalization. But Congress
That's
doesn't
right.
have the power to just willy-nilly take it away. And so really, because I view like citizenship as it's never spoken about that it's itself a right. Maybe it is somewhere, but I more conceive of it as membership in a club that there are different ways that it can be unlocked. Maybe the 14th Amendment, birthright citizenship, that could be construed as a right, like certain methods of getting citizenship.
That was actually where my mind was
Yeah.
going. Was the citizenship question has been so drenched in that of rights talk. It doesn't surprise me that, especially in the 40s, that the Supreme Court would quickly go to that kind of language, because it is a right of natural born citizens that, if you could take that as a bundle of rights, there's a bundle of rights that goes along with citizenship. We
Right.
could name those. There's a passport. There's voting rights. There's taxation obligations.
Right.
Right. There's jury duty requirements. Right. Things of this nature. And so there's this bundle of things that happens when you become a citizen through the process prescribed by Congress and the Constitution. Once that has been conferred, it is though the natural right that existed for birthright citizenship has now been gifted to the person through Congress. And once that bundle of stuff, well, I don't even know what to call it. Maybe you're right. Maybe rights is the wrong way to think about it. But that bundle of ideas is now in your possession as an individual.
Yeah.
And taking that gift away would be a tantamount to taking away a right, maybe. But
Yeah,
I can
no,
see
I
why
see
the
it,
court
yeah.
would think in those terms.
Yeah, no. I think that makes sense. That that there's a way to implicate the rights, given that citizenship has with it obligations and
Yeah.
rights entailed in it. It just feels very weird to be like, well, depriving one of citizenship, we shouldn't do that so far as, or we should construe the facts and law in favor of the citizen with respect to whether their citizenship should be taken away. I'm not saying that it's purely circular, but it just does feel like this, however you want to construe it, the power to denaturalize, which everyone grants in some cases, it's a question of how much should we allow our government to do X, and so I think it's properly thought of, at least in that context, as a powers question, but definitely ways in which the rights can come in through it. You raised one when you mentioned the, like, how does this look? Is this an evidentiary
Yeah.
hearing before a judge? And you mentioned also that for the actual denaturalization cases, they look a little bit like the criminal trial because of how the evidentiary
Yeah.
burdens, and that's questions of due process, right? Can we just take it away willy nilly?
Yeah.
Can we just take it away as a matter of policy, like they did in the Nuremberg laws? And those will obviously implicate other constitutional interests that can be conceived of as rights, including due process, including free speech, etc.
Yeah, and we could just say, and almost be done with the conversation right now and say, it appears that some of the proponents of this bill want to extend power that could potentially bump up against 5 or 6 different constitutional
Yes.
limitations, and in a way where you could, I think, as the Supreme Court and as a good jurist, you could say, "This is garbage." There's a lot of different ways. I'm not even gonna list them all. I'll just pick my favorite one, and then it's out. And in the Schneiderman case, it's almost like they did that. They didn't exactly. The rule that they created was just this high evidentiary burden, but they kind of immediately say, "Hey, we're undermining, like, a really important principle of political free speech here,
Yeah.
if we were to allow this."
You know,
And so I think that there's a lot of different ways that these rights are gonna be implicated. It's a nightmare. I would say this is the Constitution signaling red all over the place that this is governmental overreach.
yes. If you can conceive of this as a powers question, due process question, rights question,
Yeah.
it definitely is sending red flags. I don't know if this is credit to Senator Schmidt or any of these people, because I don't want to extend it that far, but it seems like they're trying to get around the due process concerns by just attaching this
Yeah.
to the end of a criminal proceeding. But again, as you mentioned, these are analytically distinct questions. Whether you're guilty of the offense, it's not necessary that it's coextensive with the determination
Yes.
on citizenship. They're fundamentally two different questions. And if the jury, for example, is in their head thinking about the consequence of denaturalization, et cetera, might that influence their decision? I know that they're told not to think about that. Maybe they wouldn't be
Yeah.
told that. Um, but I'm just trying to think of ways in which these concerns might be addressed by this legislation. Maybe a criminal
Yeah.
trial on the merits is enough, but we have to deal with the question about whether or not this is a substantively good enough basis to deprive someone
Well,
of
and
citizenship.
you could imagine right now, well, what if a state has fraud charges against a person and it's not a federal case?
Yeah.
Does this empower a state judge to undo federal law? I'd certainly not think so. So then, would there be a separate proceeding after a criminal charge was brought in state court
But
and
look at
that
the
the state
wording here, Nate.
conviction?
It says, and at the time, any court in the United States, not any
Yeah.
court of the United States, right? So there's a difference between a court within the
Yeah.
geographic boundaries of the United States. Query whether that would include Puerto Rico and territories, whatever. We'd have to figure that out. I'm sure that would come up. But putting that
Yeah.
aside, like, think about if this is just state courts, potentially state courts where
Yeah.
they don't always have the formalities of federal courts, and where state courts are not empowered by the Constitution in any respect, especially post Civil War, to decide questions
Yeah.
of federal citizenship.
No kidding. And I'll mention this too. So what does fraud mean? So of course, the federal criminal code has fraud defined. It has elements. There are different types of fraud that you can commit. What about at the state level? These things don't always match up. Some things that might be considered misrepresentation in the federal courts could be fraudulent in, like, the state of Iowa. And when there's a mismatch, and this happens all the time in immigration law, if there's a mismatch between the state and the federal elements of a crime, there's a specific balancing analysis that courts are supposed to go through to determine whether or not the state offense is substantially similar enough to the federal offense to trigger something like an INA consequence. And so
Correct me
you
if I'm
can
wrong. It
just
can actually be
imagine.
lower. It could, if it's as
Yeah.
long as it meets that test, it could actually be a lower threshold, and we can have, to quote the Supreme Court in another case, a patchwork system of
Yes.
citizenship deprivation.
That's right. I mean, imagine if you went to what's the lowest requirement of mens rea, so that just means like bad thoughts, right? So like a motive. The lowest motive, let's say North Dakota, they say, oh, driving away from a gas station is fraud without having paid. That's not theft, it's fraud. You're like, wait a minute, what? That doesn't make any intuitive sense. But if that's the law in North Dakota, suddenly that could be grounds for the termination of the citizenship of a person. And you're just like, that's like the ways in which this would break down immediately to me are legion. I do not understand who would be doing this, how they would be doing it, and it is rife for abuse. That's how I would say that.
So massive derail, but we appreciate that that nuance there, Nate. So we're back to Schneiderman. So Schneiderman's a communist. He is proposed to be removed of his citizenship, and the Supreme Court steps in and says, no, you can't do that, and that we're going to take a hard look at a bare minimum. We're taking a hard look at these denaturalization actions.
That's exactly right. So they end up saying that the law in that particular case is unconstitutional. So not only did the underlying courts just get it wrong, because they tried to strip him of his citizenship. Again, at the time, kind of would have made sense. We're in the middle of World War II, communism, right? That's a very hot topic. National security issues. Lower courts said, yeah, we're going to yank his citizenship. He gets his citizenship back, and that section of the code becomes unconstitutional. Let's go to the next slide.
Sure. Although I will note historically, just on the communism front,
yeah.
At this point, United States is allied with the Soviet Union. That's just something to know. You see a lot of the anti-communist case that arise in like the 1910s and 1920s. That's at a time in which there's a lot of fear of communism, and there's a lot of anti-war sentiment among radicals in the United States. And then you see a bunch of anti-communism cases, oftentimes in like the late 40s and 50s, and a lot dealing with immigration. But at this time, even though there definitely still is absolutely a fear of communism in this era, we're technically allied with Stalin.
That's true. Yeah. Well, that relationship was always crazy and a very weird time in geopolitical history. All right. So again, I don't know how to well say this name. Afroyim v. Rusk.
That's pretty good.
Afroyim v. Rusk. So Bez Afroyim, a naturalized U.S. citizen, originally from Poland, voted in an Israeli election in 1951. So sorry, Pisco, we can't be an Israel-free chat today.
Dual loyalty.
Dual loyalty. Okay, so the Department of State sought to revoke his citizenship under a statute that allowed loss of nationality for participating in a foreign election. By the way, just at a gut level, I could see millions of Americans saying that makes sense, right?
Yep.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I just I liked this case because it seemed very on the nose for some of the things we're dealing with right now. Afroyim challenged this revocation, asserting that Congress lacked constitutional authority to strip citizenship.
And that's how I would conceive it, just to be clear. Like that I think is the proper way to conceive it. But I think this is a good point to emphasize, that just because we say something is unconstitutional and counter to our foundational freedoms, liberties, whatever, doesn't mean it won't be necessarily popular to apply. You have to think, at the time in which these are popularly enacted laws by a Congress, right? That's our process by which laws are passed. And so it's not to say that if we put this to the test, that probably a majority of the population would be in favor. Yeah, why are you participating in a foreign election if you're an American citizen? Why are you a member of Congress if you're if you have dual citizenship, something like that?
Citizenship.
And I'm sure that actually has come up recently in discussions, the dual citizenship aspect to it. And so don't hear us to be saying, well, just that this is, everyone agrees here, because in a lot of these actions, you have to remember the popular energy is behind the government's action.
That's right. And I think too that there is a sense in which that makes that's consistent with sort of other principles. I think that some of the dual citizenship questions are actually intellectually interesting. They're not slam dunks that, oh yeah, we should allow dual and triple and quadruple citizenship. I'll be the part of as many social contracts as possible. I actually do think that there might be something there to say, some of the nationalists might be onto a little bit of something there. I'm open to those arguments. But I just want to say that in this particular case, I loved what the court said. First sentence that I quote here: in our country, the people are sovereign, and the government cannot sever its relationship to the people by taking away their citizenship. Period. So that's dicta. That's dicta. But I actually think that that's a very healthy principle to sort of color the entire conversation. Our Constitution governs us, and we must never forget that our Constitution limits the government to those powers, right? This is your argument,
Yes.
specifically granted, or those that are necessary and proper to carry out the specifically granted ones. The Constitution, of course, grants Congress no express power to strip people of their citizenship, whether in the exercise of the implied power to regulate foreign affairs or in the exercise of any specifically granted power. Your reaction on that, Pisco? That's your language, right?
Yes, that's the powers question, and I really do think strongly that that's the best way to conceptualize it, because it really does deal with the relationship between the government and the people, and what we're letting our Congress actually do, and the whole notion of citizenship, I think, is almost like prior to rights in a way.
Oh, okay, okay.
Like that question about, because of course you don't have to give rights if you're America to foreign invaders. You don't have an
Yeah.
obligation to give rights to people who aren't part. Like, we agree that the framers thought that there's this conception of natural rights that extends beyond borders. That at the time you're born, right, there is this philosophical underpinning that rights exist out there, and that I'm not denying that that's how the framers or how originally people saw it. But the question about obligation, is Iran, is it proper for them to recognize American rights? Is it the American government's job to recognize foreigners' rights, natural rights? And it seems like the governments of men are instituted for, at least conceptually, to protect a certain denominator and to respect those rights. And I don't think that there would be anything,
their own jurisdiction.
yeah, within their own territorial jurisdiction. And so that's why I say that. I think that it has to do with like how the government is set up and who. Remember the question that Trump asked and the Democrats all stood down. You guys agree that it's America's job first to stand up for citizens before illegal immigrants, right? Now, I understand why they didn't stand up, because they don't want to accept his framing. They don't want to look like they're supporting him or whatever. But as a foundational matter, Trump is not wrong that the governments of men are instituted to help the citizens, their respective citizens. And so that's why I say it's almost foundational from a political perspective. But I don't know if you agree.
Yeah, I'm interested in this. I don't know. I don't have as strong a sense on this. I'd have to go read some like Rawls
Sure.
1980s rights talk stuff to try to get this figured out. But I would say just my instinct on this is I do think that birthright citizenship to me seems very self-evident, right? Again, for the reasons we talked about last time. But to your point, that there isn't the same natural right once you've entered the polity physically to have the right of citizenship naturally extended to you. I think that is probably right. But then it gets back to this issue of, okay, well, if there's a natural born right, and then there's this other way to become a citizen, one's a right, one isn't. How do you like mesh those ideas together? I'm not exactly sure.
I would point you to the Ninth Amendment, and this is what Scalia's actually, I think, response was to people sort of pointing to the Ninth Amendment. And this is what the amendment says. Quote, the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. In other words, there are other rights out there that exist, and those rights don't need to, just because we're setting out this Constitution, this government, doesn't mean that we're disparaging that right that you reference might exist as to the third party arriving as part of the huddled masses to America, even if as a policy matter we think that they should be extended to them, and even if they unambiguously do, for example, in the case of birthright citizenship. So that would be my response to that. Is I think that we ought to have a more humanistic, a more extended view of rights that is broader than just your particular country. But from a legal perspective, I understand the importance of resolving this as a powers question, because it speaks to what the government is constituted for and what power and what abilities it has, and the relationship between it and the its people from like a pre-right perspective.
Well, and so that you must really like these couple of sentences then,
Yes.
because again, this idea the people are sovereign, the government cannot sever its relationship to the people by taking away their citizenship, not because it's an inalienable right. There's no talk of that here, right? But because the Constitution governs us, and that unless it's expressly granted, it has no ability to strip or change its relationship with the sovereign individuals, right? So, and that's a much better, that's a cleaner way to think about it. I think I'd agree with that.
That said, here's the but C. Here's the but C for me, and tell me what you think. It says we the people are sovereign. We the people of the United States. It doesn't say we the citizens of the United States. And of course, personhood is broader than citizenship. And
right,
so,
right.
So that's we agree that people are sovereign, but the people aren't necessarily the citizens. And so that's something I would emphasize, that the Constitution seems to be quite deliberate when it references citizens and when it references persons, people, etc. The right of the people to keep and bear arms,
Yeah.
the right of the people to be free from unreasonable search and seizures. That extends beyond just citizens. It's so
well, and the idea then would be something like this. If you look at the Constitution as the federal government should leave you alone, but in these circumstances, right? And then we're going to list powers where it can start to infringe upon you, even if it's not rights. Maybe it's just infringing upon your walk to the church, right? So there's going to be some level of infringement, but we're going to be very specific about the powers of infringement. And if there isn't an express power of infringement, we should immediately look at the government's behavior with great suspicion. And I think that's probably the cleanest way to look at it, because you were kind of mentioning this with Scalia. We can't come up with every possible way the federal government might infringe somebody's rights. So we don't start with a list of all of the rights and then try to think through every possible deprivation that's available and then prohibit that. Instead, it's like, hey, we have these limited powers. We assume that you're sovereign. We're going to keep them muzzled. We're going to keep the federal government muzzled and chained. And to your point, then you just make the argument, oh, no, you're off the chain. You got to get back on the chain. We're not going to allow you to do this.
I 100% agree with that distillation of it. And just the last point, and then I'm sorry, I keep getting obsessed in these side tangents or whatever. I think from a practical perspective, it analytically maintains multiple areas of attack towards any policy that would propose to take away denaturalization or citizenship, such as, for example, attacking Congress's inherent authority to do it, attacking how they do it from a procedural perspective, attacking the reason why they're doing it. Okay, we're doing it for racial reasons. We're doing it for religious reasons. We're taking away your citizenship because you said something bad of the government. So, analytically separating those, I think, more cleanly preserves those alternative constitutional arguments. And they oftentimes will raise themselves, these kinds of policies, in the context of racial animus, ethnic animus, xenophobia, and First Amendment related sort of speech stuff.
Yeah. I think that's good. Well, okay, so back to the case. The entire legislative, by the way, this part also jumped out to me because it kind of merges some of the things we talked about last time. The entire legislative history of the 1868 Act makes it abundantly clear. And by the way, that's in reference to the Naturalization Act of 1868 after the 14th Amendment. So that's why that's relevant. There was a strong feeling in the Congress that the only way the citizenship it conferred could be lost was by the voluntary renunciation or abandonment by the citizen himself. And this was the unequivocal statement of the court in the case of U.S. v. Wong Kim Ark. And so this I thought was very interesting too, that really from a 14th Amendment perspective, which is the perspective that Afroyim, this case is taking, it's like, hey, in a 14th Amendment context, the only ways we think you can get rid of your citizenship would be an unequivocal statement of renunciation or abandonment. Those are the only grounds.
And that era is so important, guys. The post-Civil War era is so important because that is an inflection point where America's conception of identity changes fundamentally and reasserts itself in different ways. We see a relationship between the country, the Union, and the citizen that was fundamentally different in the founding era, which kind of was more confederation based, more viewing their states as their country. You know, you will see references to my country when it comes to the founding fathers. They're talking about Virginia oftentimes, or wherever they are, you know, Massachusetts, etc. There's this provincial nature about it, but they resolved a bunch of these identity questions in the post Civil War era, including with the 14th Amendment and the 1868 Act passed after the amendment. The problem is, with any word like voluntary renunciation or abandonment or any exception, bad faith actors are going to use, for example, the term foreign invaders when we were talking about the exception to birthright citizenship, oh, well, illegal immigrants are just foreign invaders. Or you see
Right.
abandonment, well, you constructively abandon your citizenship whenever you
Abandoned.
do like a crime or something. So you got to be very careful with these exceptions that I don't know, the current administration and bad faith actors will try to use that exception to swallow up the rule. But yes, this is really good language and reaffirming, reciting, maybe even in dicta, Wong Kim Ark.
That's right. Well, and then jump to the next one. So the next slide does a little more riffing on Wong Kim Ark. The issues in that case were whether a person born in the United States, the Chinese aliens, was a citizen of the U.S., and whether, nevertheless, he could be excluded under the Chinese Exclusion Act. The court first held that within the terms of the 14th Amendment, Wong Kim Ark was a citizen of the United States, and then pointed out that, though he might renounce his citizenship and become a citizen of any other country, he had never done so, which is interesting that they picked up on that language. That Congress could not do anything to abridge or affect his citizenship conferred by the 14th Amendment. Quoting Chief Justice Marshall's well-considered and oft-repeated dictum in Osborne to the effect that Congress, under the power of naturalization, has, quote, a power to confer citizenship, not a power to take it away, close quote. Right, so to me, this gets back to your point. Congress has no power to take away citizenship.
Yeah, and really important also to note the reference to the Chinese Exclusion Act, which, as far as I understand, is still good law. And what does it mean to say that the Chinese Exclusion Act is still good law? Does that mean that Chinese people are not allowed in the country? No, that's not what we mean. I mean to say that the precedent of Xi Jinping, Fang Weiting, these kinds of decisions, the foundational decisions about sort of the United States government's inherent sovereign authority, that those are still good law. And what do those cases say? That notwithstanding the fact that the Constitution is pretty silent on exclusion of people into the country, that there's just this inherent power that a country has to deny access to the country to people that don't want to be in the country. And so what is the import of that? Well, if the country has this inherent authority to deny access, surely they have the authority to rescind access to someone already in the country. But what you are seeing time and time again is the Supreme Court stress that an exclusion decision is different than an internal displacement issue, that an exclusion decision gets more deference. And at the point of the border, whether it's a Muslim ban, Trump versus Hawaii, I know that in that case they didn't construe it officially as that, but I'm not sure why it would be the case that a Muslim ban would be unconstitutional if we're maintaining Xi Jinping, but that those decisions are given extra deference. And we're going to give extra deference to exclusion decisions of non-citizens. And that's very different than internal displacement or deportation issues related especially to citizens, but also, by the way, non-citizens.
Well, and you've really tried to emphasize, keep your eye on where the power source is. If the government has a clear power source to something, don't do the sloppy thinking and assume that there's a parallel opposite kind of power that could do something similar on the other end, right? So letting people in is one kind of a power. Excluding people out is an entirely separate power. The mind might think, well, it's the same thing. It's not the same thing. And so it's important to keep those power sources, I think, a little bit separate.
There's a comment here that says, but that's against the First Amendment. You have to remember, right? The Chinese exclusion law banned you on the basis of nationality, but really it was a racial ban. I mean, it really
was a racial.
It was a racial ban, and there were explicit racial components of it. Now, maybe it's the case that the Supreme Court would find some way to overturn that aspect of the Chinese Exclusion Act, but still to this day, Xi Jinping is cited as good precedent. What does it tell you? That the exclusion decision is treated differently than other kinds of government actions, such that per se racial bans, in this country, we don't anymore allow affirmative action. So on the basis of race, explicit racial bans might be sustained in the context of exclusion decisions versus in the interior. And that's why when you read Roberts' decision in Trump versus Hawaii, he applies rational basis to it as like a step up test from what was implied in some of these other cases where there was this language of bona fide and legitimate standard for related to exclusion decisions, which was, I guess, extra deferential as compared to rational basis. So You have to read that decision. Roberts treats it as though it were an explicit Muslim ban, or at least if we're going to include the statements. Um, and it's not clear that a Muslim ban explicitly would be banned by the Constitution. That wasn't decided in that case.
Do you think then, this is me, I'm interacting with this idea for the first time. So do you think then that race-based, like what if there were a law passed by Congress tomorrow that said whites only for immigration?
I would
And
think,
it was
yeah,
yeah, and it was explicitly racist. I mean, we're just gonna
yeah.
like make it the most racist version possible. What do you think happens in that scenario?
I'll give you my thoughts. I think that ban should be unconstitutional. I would overturn Xi Jinping, and I would
Okay, okay.
overturn, or I would deal with it on the grounds of saying, okay, Xi Jinping, they got the sovereign part right, but you can't do it for racial reasons, because that violates another part of the 14th and 5th Amendment. It's 14th and 5th, Equal Protection Clause incorporated by the 5th, reverse incorporated by the 5th Amendment. So I would overturn Xi Jinping insofar as it's holding, sustaining the law. That said, I think if we're being faithful to Xi Jinping, if we're being faithful to the Chinese Exclusion Act case law, I think it would be sustained. And I think a Muslim ban should be sustained on those grounds. I would just overturn that aspect of the
Do you
holding.
Well, you know me, I think that it's just deeply irrational. So I would say it can't pass rational review.
Oh,
I
really?
could say like, yeah, I that's how I would say. I know rational review is actually just that's it's not actually doing an inquiry if it's rational or not. That's just putting everybody on notice that the government can kind of do whatever it wants. But I think I would be tempted to say I don't want to necessarily blow up the whole thing because I do think you could have a nationality based temporary ban that probably would hold up, but it
Yes.
would have to have
Oh,
some
that's
really
clear. Yeah.
compelling reasons or something, right?
Well, I don't even think that they would need to have a compelling reason. I think the suspension clause of the Immigration Nationality Act gives the president wide deference to do all kinds of
Well,
bans
already, yeah,
on the
that's
basis
true.
of nationality, right? That is not that is not suspect under the current case law. I do think, however, we have to deal with like a racial or ethnic, something that is protected presumably by
Yeah,
the
a
First
protected
Amendment.
ground, yeah.
And if you say something like, well, rational basis, that is explicitly, even if you take that test, right, that Nate is
Yeah.
presenting to you, and for those of you who are not lawyers, there's just kind of tiers of scrutiny analysis that we will deal with different kinds of regulations. What you are presenting, that it would fail rational basis, is saying that the test for an explicit racial ban is different interior of the country versus at the point of entry. So you're saying we'll treat an explicitly racist law differently if it's totally domestic versus if it's an exclusion law. So that's already telling you there's a
Yeah.
different test. And I just think if we're applying rational basis truly, right? Like if the government says, well, we have a legitimate government interest in defending America, and look at these statistics that show that I don't know, Islamist terrorism is more likely to occur among Muslims. We just need to figure out
Right.
what the hell is going on. I don't know why
Yeah,
it wouldn't
yeah,
pass
right.
rational basis, right? Now
No,
I
that's
am
right. As
against
a
it.
practical matter, it wouldn't, yeah.
Yeah.
That's me equivocating, that's all.
But sorry, another tangent, but it's relevant to say that these powers relate to each other: exclusion, interior, denaturalization, but don't think that they always produce the same result analytically, conceptually, whatever.
That's right.
But yes, thank you for bringing this case, and the relation to Wong Kim Ark is noted.
Okay, we can kind of skip this one. Let's jump to the next one. Let's see. Yeah, that just did more quotes. That's cool. Top v. Doles. Yeah, there we go. All right, perfect. I'll just do it over here so I can see it. So Albert Top. This one's very interesting. 1958. A native-born U.S. citizen and Army private deserted briefly in French Morocco. Now, I choose this case because this is the next domino, right? This is the next domino. What about a native-born citizen? What if a native-born citizen committed such a heinous crime that there was a law in the books that says we're going to strip you of your citizenship? And so this is Trop v. Doles or Top v. Doles. I can't remember. I think it might be Trop. I can't remember.
Yep.
Yeah, Trop v. Doles. So in 1944, voluntarily returned within a day. So he's a troop during World War II in Morocco, and he has a bad day and he pieces out, and then he comes back. Okay, poor guy. I have no idea. Would love to hear the story behind all that. I'd be fascinated. Convicted by court-martial, as he should be. Cannot do that. He served 3 years and received a dishonorable discharge.
Fair.
In 1952, when he applied for a passport, the State Department denied it, asserting that under Section 401G of the Nationality Act of 1940, he had lost his citizenship. Lower courts upheld the statute, and Trop appealed to the Supreme Court. The court ruled that revoking citizenship for wartime desertion violated the Eighth Amendment's prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment.
Pause. So important, right? The reason why
Yeah.
they're revoking citizenship is invoking a separate right, the right to be free from cruel and unusual punishment. So this is getting at not the fact that they revoke citizenship, but why, which is conceptually different than the previous case, which was denying the power whatsoever. So notice that analytical distinction. Sorry for the interruption.
Well, and then also notice from the very first case where they were invoking some rights talk, that was an entirely different analytical framework as well.
Correct.
And it gets back to this idea that this proposed law change by the Missouri senator is a nightmare because it's going to bump into many, many different constitutional violations as people try to figure out what's going on. So the language on this is very straightforward. Quote, petitioner urges that imposing loss of citizenship as a punishment for wartime desertion is a violation of both the Due Process Clause of the Fifth Amendment and the Eighth Amendment. His objections are that there is no notice of expiration as a consequence of desertion in the provision. Oh, excuse me, you're right. Expatriation as a consequence of desertion in the provision defining that offense, that loss of citizenship as a punishment is unconstitutionally disproportionate to the offense of desertion, and that loss of citizenship constitutes cruel and unusual punishment. And so I thought that was just another interesting way that the court approached this and said, no, you can't do this.
And the fact pattern is so, every one of your fact patterns has been so delicious from the Supreme Court, because one of them deals with ideology, right? The communist fact pattern, and a kind of idea, a subversive ideology. This one deals with disloyalty. Okay. And so this is at the heart of what we're talking about here. This is perhaps one of the more disloyal things that you could do as an officer, swearing an oath to serve and protect, to follow orders of your military. You desert. And what does the court say? Violation of the Due Process Clause. Now, why is it a violation of the Due Process Clause? Well, it's a violation of the Due Process Clause because procedurally there's no notice that he wasn't put on notice that this could be a punishment if you desert. That if you desert, you would lose your citizenship. That's a procedural argument about, well, we don't know, right? We don't know that in general, people should be aware if we're going to apply punishments to people that their conduct might lead to the given result. And then there's the Eighth Amendment argument. So those are two ways, again, additional ways to conceptualize the issue.
Yeah, I think this one is fun because, again, it's our first one of a native-born citizen. This isn't somebody who is granted citizenship through the naturalization process, and the government was still interested in trying to rip the person's citizenship away from him. And the answer was no. And so what do you think about this Eighth Amendment argument by the court here?
Yeah, so it's interesting to me because I think it's suggesting the following, that banishment is cruel and unusual.
That's right.
And banishment has, at least, there are some places that used to practice banishment, but the suggestion here is that in certain matters, like especially criminal matters, not in immigration matters, that you're not allowed to impose certain cruel and unusual punishments. You can't torture people as a result of the punishment. And well, this is a criminal offense. This court-martial, I'm assuming he was convicted of something, right? So he was convicted by court-martial. So he was convicted of an offense, and the response by the court is basically banishment or something akin to banishment is cruel and unusual. So I actually think it's suggesting that citizens have a right, an inherent right to be free from banishment. That's what I read it as, even though it is about the citizenship, not necessarily about sending them out. But I think that if they maintained a citizenship and tried to deport him, they would maintain that ruling.
So if I'm convicted of fraud, does this mean that I can have my citizenship ripped from me?
How? Yeah, how? Unless there's a distinction between natural born and naturalized. Maybe that would be the basis on which to and keep in mind the law.
It would seem a pretty thin distinction.
Yes. Because on all other grounds,
again, we could talk. Yeah, it's a very thin ground, and I think that this is just another example. Especially if we go back to the procedure part of this, if there isn't a good opportunity to be heard, there's no way to defend yourself on this issue other than, am I guilty or not guilty of a crime? then I could still see there being some Fifth Amendment problems. And then you say, really, all you're doing is you're adding a kicker on the punishment side for fraud. We're going to say that fraud is a particularly bad crime. And by the way, if you're a naturalized citizen, we're going to put this extra kicker, which is banishment, on top of it. And that, to me, I mean, that fails all over the place, right? Like, why do we have this special group of people that we're going to give extra punishment to? And that punishment is probably in violation of the Eighth Amendment anyway. So I found that all very interesting.
I totally hear you on that. I just want to make sure I'm getting this right. So 237A2, is that just fraud related offenses, or am I crazy? Just let me.
It might, well, so A2. Let's look it up.
Let's look it up. Yeah. So 237 eine. So it's little a, big 2. Let's see, little a. Sorry, folks. We'll edit this part out.
You don't have to. Everybody should know that there's real research that has to happen in the world. It's fine.
Yeah.
We're living in the moment.
That we are.
Oh, come on. Everybody wants to. I hate reading house.gov and their code.
It says,
it's so hard.
Wait a second. Nate, I think this might be broader. It says criminal offenses. So this is little a, big 2. General crimes involving moral turpitude, multiple criminal convictions, aggravated felony, high-speed flight, failure to register as a sex offender, controlled substances.
So it's all the
deportable criminal offenses.
To throw the whole kitchen sink.
Yeah. So this is, I think, even worse than we thought about just a moment ago. I think this is every crime here, and just keep in mind, folks, crimes involving moral turpitude, and that is like a very broad category of offense that it could include things like larceny offenses. It could include things that we in our normal day-to-day might think is like, okay, that's bad or whatever. This would apply to those situations. It would certainly apply to things like murder. That would be considered an aggravated felony. So all murderers who are naturally, obviously you could deport them. But this is not just fraud. This is for any one of the deportable offenses, including drug offenses. So including if you're a naturalized citizen and you fall within the deportable controlled substances crimes, as an example, any alien who at any time after admission has been convicted or of a violation or conspiracy or attempt to violate any law or regulation of a state, the United States, or a foreign country related to a controlled substance, other than a single offense involving possession for one's own use of 30 grams or less of marijuana, is deportable. So if you're a natural-born citizen who legally under state law is selling marijuana, for example, you might be unknowingly in violation of federal marijuana laws and make yourself deportable.
Yeah, 237A2, it's the whole kit and caboodle. It's not just the fraud sections. The fraud sections are right before that. Because normally, if you do a misrepresentation or some sort of fraud bit to immigration itself, it's a waivable offense, meaning it's something where you can basically be like, oh, hey, my bad. I kind of lied a little bit on the paperwork. Let me do a waiver process so that I can get the paperwork cleaned up. I can come clean. I'll get my paperwork cleaned up, and then I'll show you why I'm worth having a second chance given to. But that skips all of that and then just goes straight to all the criminal offenses. But it would exclude the drug ones or something. That's like a really stupid way. Firearm offenses are out. Miscellaneous crimes are out.
Oh, got it. So the law itself skips some of them.
Yeah, the law would skip some of them, but not others. But like you say, some of those other crimes are CIMTs anyway.
Yeah.
Right. So like even if it's not expressly mentioned, you can argue that it's a CIMT. So yeah, it's really, really, really overbroad. I don't know. I just don't know how this thing could pass any sort of constitutional muster. But just kind of getting back to this.
Yes.
There's the rhetoric right now that had me thinking about this topic so much. And I don't even know if we want to look at any of these stupid tweets.
Yeah, no, let's do it.
Okay, so if you go to the next slide. So this was the guy who actually got me like all riled up. So this is Andy Ogles. So he's from the 5th District of Tennessee. And he started tweeting the stuff out. You can see the dates. I left those on there. So this is March 9th. Muslims don't belong in American society. Right? March 13th. 2 Muslim terrorist attacks yesterday. Michigan and Virginia. Name Muhammad. I told you so. Repeal Hart Keller, Save America. So that Pisco, do you want to explain what Hart
Yeah.
Keller is, or do you want me to?
So that I didn't know it was Keller Hart. I thought it was Hart Seller. Maybe it's Keller.
Oh, nah,
Who cares? But
I wasn't there in 1965. I wasn't there when this all happened.
So I think the Hart Seller Act actually passed in the the 60s or the 50s? It might have been the 60s actually. Yeah, I think it was in the 60s.
Well, yeah, I think it got through in the 60s.
Yeah.
It might have been proposed in the 50s.
And there was an old system. The old immigration system was designed that it was like explicitly racist, explicitly exclusionary at certain places, and favored immigration from certain like white areas. And by its terms, the quota system wasn't equal access. In other words, that's how I understand it. And the new update to that was to make it so that it was legal to come from or to immigrate from different places, and to open up the availability, especially of family-based petitions, that kind of stuff.
That's right.
Overhaul the quota system as well.
Yeah, it's the beginning of the framework for legal immigration in the US as we have it today. And so many people, especially on the online right troll universe, like to go back to this moment in the 1960s when this thing passes and say this is the moment where these demographic issues started to happen. Of course, that's not true, and that's just mostly because the definition of whiteness changed around that time, which is a conversation for another day. The history of who gets to be considered white and who doesn't is fascinating. By the way, little Mormon plug, Mormons for a little while were considered their own race. So there was this really interesting situation where Congress in the 1840s started sending doctors out to the Utah Territory to determine if polygamy degraded the white race into something new. And so by practicing polygamy, Mormons became less, they weren't white enough because we were participating in something that was perceived as Muslim. And so by doing this Muslim thing, we were no longer considered white and a new race. They said this is a new race that is a lesser race to the East Coast whites that were the good ones or something like that. And
you run into the problem of Goebbels and Hitler that they had with defining what a Jew is.
Yeah.
Of course, the Nuremberg laws didn't do it. They only did it by reference to your particular parentage and your particular ancestry, with respect to a Jew that, of course, is not defined in the law itself. But there are other aspects of the Hart-Celler Act that were actually meant to favor European immigration. At least that was an argument that was that some of the sponsors or the defectors who ended up supporting the bill would say to the kind of racially conscious white people who might have been against it, in that the family-based petitions, to the extent that they were based on close familial relationships, well, most of the people in the United States are white. And so if it's favoring family-based entry, it's just going to favor white people because, of course, white people are the ones who are in the country already, and they're the ones who potentially are going to marry. And so,
yeah,
and therefore, like, get people and more likely to marry, to white people. So it's more complicated. I think the racial goals of the previous law, those were definitely considered by the Congress that passed the Hart-Celler Act, and they were catered to with respect to at least the provision on family-based petitions. At least that was an argument put out there. So I even think that the whole conception that this was a grand strategy to make America like browner or to change the stock of America, I think that's totally overblown and a myth.
So Ogles goes on to say, hope is not lost. We can still denaturalize him. Communists cannot win.
That's
this
Zoran.
Is in reference to the mayor of New York City, Zoran Mamdani. That was from back in 2025, so November 5th, 2025. So he was already on this. We should be able to denaturalize people I don't like train. And then on the 13th of March, so Hart-Celler Immigration Act of 1965 in conjunction with the Immigration Act of 1990 is the most recent declaration of war Congress has ever passed. Not only did this legislation declare war on American culture, but it has also been sending foreign troops to every American community to steal their jobs, erase their religion and infiltrate their schools.
This is insane.
I am prepping a monumental bill that repeals Hart-Celler, ends the H-1B visa scam, which, by the way, he's just like throwing in everything. This is very conspiratorial thinking, right? Like, I'm going to take all my
It's Groyper
grievances and put it
thinking.
in.
Yes, it's Groyper thinking. This is Nick Fuentes talking point. But yeah, keep
Yeah,
going, sir.
yeah. So end chain migration and creates a whole new character-based system, not a merit-based system, a character-based system. What do you think that means, Pisco?
Yeah, no. I think this statement. Oh, I'll tell you what it means in a second. I think the bottom right statement is the worst statement here. Even worse than the Muslims don't belong in American society. Pluralism is a lie statement. Why do I think this statement is worse? Even though that the Muslim statement is more inflammatory, certainly the one against Mamdani. This
Yeah.
statement of that the Hart-Celler Act is a declaration of war against America, that it's a declaration of war on American culture, that is clearly stating that the racial goals of the pre-Hart-Celler Act, that is what American culture is. That is what America is. In other words, America is defined by its ethnic
Yeah.
and racial heritage. Now, you can have a anti-Muslim bias or whatever, and just be like, well, Muslims are terrorists, and so I would see that as a more local prejudice. This is a more expansive prejudice. It's not just saying just Muslims. It's saying what it is to be an American is to be white. What it is to be an American is to have white ethnicity and heritage preserved, and that America is defined not with reference to a moral proposition or to equality or the Constitution, but by reference to American white and white culture, white religion, white schools. That is a much more radical, I think, framing than this kind of like Muslims bad trope, which is horrible, but obviously more, I think, limited in the scope. And I think this is a kind of Nick Fuentes talking point. So that's my response. And that's what I think
Well,
he
and
means by
it's
character.
yeah, and I think that now it has someone who's preparing a bill. I think he said that he actually has the bill now. I just don't know if it's public yet. I don't know what that will look like. I mean, maybe we could kill some of our brain cells and look into the pits of despair and see how they want to construct white America. I have no idea. We maybe should do that sometime. But it was very disheartening to see this sequence of events from him in particular. He'd already been sort of, a right-wing hack, but now you see him really accelerating the rhetoric, trying to actually put together a piece of legislation. To me, those are subtle moves. I like to describe it as it's like the internet escaped into the real world a little bit. The Groyper stuff has started to escape, right, from like the cracks of the internet and are now starting to manifest in reality. And that's just misery. Why do we want to make ourselves miserable? It's a self-defeating, very harmful ideology. And it's not just harmful to the people it targets, although it is obviously bad for them. It's bad for the people it purports to try to promote. And it's just crazy to me. But it seems to be very much, instead of having a good conversation about the Iran war, many people who are on the right in politics would much rather hit these keys than talk about the fact that their president launched them into a war that they don't like.
I've been talking about this for months and months and months. I'm concerned about the Groypers and about Nick Fuentes. I think one of the worst things to come out of the assassination of Charlie Kirk, though obviously condemn that, and I thought that by itself it's a horrible thing. We have no stomach for that kind of shit. But is that it really just empowered an alternative vision, an alternative narrative that at least facially is way more coherent, understandable, and I don't know, it seems more authentic than the Trumpian vision. And the Iran war is doing the same thing. That when you hear this kind of worldview about what America is and what it ought be, it is a fixture in a way that Trump's, you might say, schizophrenic impulses, his impulses to change on a dime sometimes, or to be rooted in even recently some neocon policies when it comes to interventionism. It won't appeal to this young Republican class. And so I am concerned that the charismatic vision, that the coherent vision on offer by the Groypers, by the national Christians, or whatever you want to call them, that these people are going to gain additional support over time.
Well, and if you go down to the next one, we'll just see more people joining the band, the drum beat. So this is Coach, Senator Tuberville, out of Alabama. And March 16th, so again, this is very recent. Sharia law is incompatible with American values. This isn't about, scare quotes, racism. Radical Islam isn't a race, it's a death cult. We do not want any more radical Islam here.
I want to pause real quick, folks. Like, I agree that Sharia and religious law, I'm not a supporter of it. I don't support. I mean, this is why I'm in favor of the Constitution and the separation of church and state. But understand here, there are a lot of dog whistles here. There are a lot of dog whistles,
Yeah,
and you have to learn to just not engage with statements based on what they're facially saying. I would say the same thing about, for example, the Joe Kent statement, which on its face, you might agree with some of it, that they're lying about the war, but you have to look deeper at who's being signaled to, and what is the broader worldview or intent of the people who make the statement. So just because you might disagree with religious law or the application of religious law in public, and I do, doesn't mean that this shouldn't be concerning for you. And of course, the scare quotes on racism, I think that indicates that he's highly skeptical of the notion that Republicans are indeed racist towards people from Arab backgrounds or Muslim backgrounds, etc.
well, then the very next tweet, Europe has fallen.
Yeah.
America is next if we don't wake up. I mean, that's not even that's not even a dog whistle. Europe has fallen. What's he talking about? He's talking about too many Browns, and he's saying America is next if we don't wake up. What does wake up mean? It means do things like what Ogles was recommending, which is let's start to legislate and make it use overreaches of federal power to remake the country in the image that we want. And I think that's a huge problem. And then here he is in the corner. This was today, or in the last 24 hours, I should say. There is nothing vague about what I said. Radical Islam is the enemy of any freedom-loving American. The liberal media is running cover for radical Islamists, but the Quran is pretty clear on its instructions to kill all non-Muslims. And
Which
then
is not
it's
true. Which is not even true as a
no,
religious matter. But understand the conflation there. So he says it's radical. Radical implies like some sort of like break from the orthodox, right? It's something that is not usual. It's a distortion. But then he literally says, well, actually, it's clear what the Quran says. But just folks, I do not support Islam ideology. I don't support Sharia. This is not me trying to say that I support all these ideologies or whatever. But it just is known that there is a notion in Islamic law of people of the book, and that people of the book, that is, I think the term is dhimmi, have to pay either they do have to pay a tax or don't have to pay a tax, but they're treated differently. For sure, it's bad, right? A different system, and we don't
the
agree with it.
Enlightenment hasn't reached the Islamic world, at least in their text. Yeah.
But it's not an explicit commandment to kill people of the book on Islamic theorists' view, or at least
I think it's prohibited. Isn't it prohibited? I mean, anyway, I don't know. I'm not.
And again, this is just like, notice the shifting views here and the inconsistencies. And so you really, I think, have to take issue with the statement. And then again, saying that liberal media is running cover for radical Islamists, I don't know that that's strictly speaking true. I would agree that a lot of Democrats are more cagey about their criticisms regarding like the Palestinians or whatever, but they're also cagey about criticisms of Israel and their criticisms of religion in general in the country. It's a very sensitive
That's right.
subject.
The Democrats are very cagey about, and then we could make a very long list of things they're cagey about.
They're very cagey.
They're very cagey. It's one of the tenets of the Democratic Party. That's just the way it is. I'll also just mention too, I think that political rhetoric from elected officials is uniquely different and causes me way more consternation than political rhetoric from an anonymous account on Twitter. These are not the same thing. Once you are in the halls of power, right? Tuberville can call Trump tomorrow. He's got him on speed dial, right? Like, this guy, he has immense influence inside of the Senate. There's a real easy path to go from bad rhetoric, bad ideas, to bad laws and the suffering of our people. And so I think that's just crazy, and that's why I'm calling that out. He's also mentioned things in the past, I didn't put it on here, about we need to denaturalize sitting members of the House, right? Ilhan Omar. He's talked about we need to, I mean, this has been a talking point from elected officials in the GOP for far too long. And it's why do I say it's far too long? You cannot deport your political enemies. That is a bad way to run a country. It is self-defeating. It will make you miserable. It will make everyone miserable. Obviously, the person being deported is miserable, but it makes everyone miserable. It's a bad way to operate. And so I don't know. This stuff just makes me so mad. I don't know how to articulate how angry it makes me.
And it's a contrary vision to the one. I have a lot of problems with these people, the Republican Party of the George Bush era. But one thing, when you look back at those years in the aftermath of the most tragic and most important terrorist attack in our history, 9/11, the immediate aftermath, what was the impulse of George Bush in that moment? He said this is not a war against Muslims, that he respects the Muslims who live in America and abroad, that he thinks that, and by the way, many Muslims were victims, not just of in 9/11, but victims of Al-Qaeda more generally. I mean, some of the biggest victims of radical Islamists are Muslims themselves in the various countries in which this occurs, in the sectarian conflict, etc. But George Bush did make it a priority, at least in his rhetoric, to separate
Yeah, that's
that.
right.
And I appreciated that. Just as, by the way, John McCain, when he was responding to this woman in the crowd at one of the speeches, says, no, he's not a Muslim, atheist, whatever she was saying, Muslim, communist.
He's a good family man and a good American. We just disagree on things. Yeah.
There was a type of Republican that was willing to say not all Muslims. And I just don't really see the same level of.
Yeah,
we were looking for Republicans to come out strongly against Andy Ogle's statement, and some of them kind of was like, I don't agree with that. But can you imagine if they had said this about a Jew? Like, Jews don't belong in America.
Oh, yeah.
The Democrat, he would be tossed from Congress potentially for saying something like that. Democrats would turn on him if he said that, and so we can't stomach it, and we need to go back to an era, at least, where we have this acknowledgement from both sides that just on the basis of religion, you're not American.
Yeah, I think that's right. So the next slide are just a bunch of tweets from Eric Schmidt. He's the senator from Missouri. We've been looking at his bill. He says a bunch of stupid stuff. I hate it. You can just go to the next one.
Wait, can we not look at it? I want to read them out.
Well, we can. It's just the same kind of stuff. The next one, there's some variations on a theme. But so after the Save America Act, Congress should pass the Scam Act, so we can denaturalize and deport those who fraudulently obtain citizenship and never should have been here in the first place.
And again, fraud is being defined here as something broader than just fraud, because as we'll talk about it, you are able to get people denaturalized if not just for fraud though, like in the commission of fraudulently obtaining your citizenship, you do some kind of, like you said, material misrepresentation intentionally for the purpose of trying to hide something. So he is now trying to put all the crimes that would make one deportable into that bucket. And
that's right.
But continuing on, can you read the next tweet?
Yeah. So enough talk about Somali fraud. We need immediate action. This is from December 2025. Arrest all Somali fraudsters under 18 U.S.C. 1343 wire fraud, which is very broad. Mm-hmm. Very, very broad. 2, immediately revoke all Somali fraudsters' visas, denaturalize where possible. And then 3, deport all eligible for deportation. So in the throes of the Minneapolis surge by ICE and CBP, Eric Schmidt is one of the people who's like, hey, go find. And one of the problems that they were running into is that most of the people implicated in these supposed Somali fraud rings are U.S. citizens.
Yeah.
Some naturalized, but most of them were born in Minneapolis. And so, of course, that's frustrating because the right wing would like to over-punish those people more than just what the federal law says, and they want to banish them from the country.
Yeah, and it is definitely a double standard in terms of the coverage from the right wing. Like, they sleep when they talk about all the fraud that is occurring in the context of the MAGA grift, et cetera, et cetera. Steve Bannon. I mean, Bannon is both on the Epstein files and with respect to what he did with the border. It's just shameless how they defrauded MAGA people themselves.
But again, I think it's just a rhetoric move, right? Because fraud is sort of the topic of the moment. And because of that, on January 16th, the fraud in Minneapolis or Minnesota is the tip of the iceberg. Enough talk. It's time for action. I'm introducing a bill to denaturalize people who defraud our country, like you say, being loose with the terms,
Yep.
anything that would make our country look bad, right? Anything that would be impermissible, commit felonies or espionage, or join terrorist organizations.
That would include like Antifa and whoever they define as it. Yeah.
Yeah, being a Democrat. Like I've heard Trump say that the Democrats are terrorists.
100%.
Okay, so these fraudsters and criminals don't deserve the privilege of citizenship.
Who's this guy on the
Again,
left again? He's a commentator in the space.
yeah, he's some commentator guy. I don't remember, but I say a lot of mean things to him on my Twitter account, so I don't know.
He said
He
said something to Mehdi Hassan.
Yeah.
I'm not remember. I think he was on Abby Phillips on CNN. But this guy, he has said some insane shit too. But yeah, Chad, if you remember that, because I want to pull up the quote too if we get it. But thank you for reading those.
So these next ones were the ones that I actually thought was like a much broader, like it kind of just goes to show that this is a domino is denaturalizing naturalized citizens. But then there's this next round of dominoes that's obviously just like waiting to tumble in the minds of these people on the right. So this is Representative Mary Miller. Radical Islam has no home in the United States. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Denaturalize and deport every single one who propagates this evil ideology.
First Amendment issue there, as well as the substantive power issue that we're talking about there. Yep. So because who decides what's an evil ideology fit for denaturalization? I mean, if you do it with radical Islam, okay. If you who determines what is radical Islam? In their mind, radical Islam is Orthodox Islam, regular Islam, anyone who preaches the Quran on the view of some of these Republicans.
Yeah. March 12th. This is Bill. I don't know how to say his name. He's a Fox News guy. I call him the shadow PR person for DHS. So Bill does all the ride-alongs. He has direct access to the heads of DHS, Christy Noem, people like that. Okay. And so he said this on March 12th. Right now, U.S. law makes it difficult to denaturalize a U.S. citizen unless they committed some sort of fraud during the naturalization process. True. Congress may want to take up immediate denaturalization and deportation for anyone convicted of supporting terrorists. Just a thought. Not terrorism. Supporting terrorists.
And there is, by the way, there is case law. The case is called Holder v. something. Oh my God, now I'm remembering it. But there is an exception in the First Amendment for material support for terrorist organizations, that they can make that a crime. That you're allowed to make crime offering material support to a foreign designated terrorist organization. Holder versus Humanitarian Law Project. That's the case. But that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is independent advocacy. Independent advocacy that someone might construe in favor of a terrorist organization, and where there isn't even a necessary connection between a foreign terrorist organization and domestic terrorist organization. I actually think the material support provision would be unconstitutional as applied domestically, because there it's like material support to give legal services to a foreign terrorist organization. That can't be constitutional as applied to like domestically recognized terrorist organizations. And it starts to look very, very, very scary when you're talking about independent advocacy and domestic.
That's why I say, like, to me, all of this rhetoric just makes it very clear that this is an attractive line of thought for people in power on the right to try to help shape the universe in the way that they want to and to punish their enemies. And that makes me very concerned. So Tom Cotton, senator from Arkansas, he's an Arkansas guy. American citizenship is sacred. It's not for criminals and terrorists who lie their way into our country. My bill protects Americans by revoking citizenship from these frauds. I haven't read his bill. This was just brand new. It's like same thing. I don't know what that says, but like you can see a lot of people are jumping on
these are major Republicans. So Tom Cotton is a major Republican.
Going to run for president in 2028.
100%. 100%. And they're
he's a Claremont Institute guy. Like, I mean, these are not fringe guys. Like, this is my point. This is not the fringe anymore. We're getting closer and closer to the middle of the GOP. Jeremy Carl, I don't know if you knew much about him. He was up for some. Yeah, this guy, he's kind of a weirdo, but he was up for some Department of State position that required the Senate to give its consent. So it was a higher level position. I don't know what position it was. But he has a whole bunch of Groyper tweets. And so a few Republicans took a stand against this guy and said, no, we're not going to. By the way, one of them is from Utah. So we got one of the Utah senators said, we're not going to allow this guy to get out of committee. No. I think
It
Mike
was
Lee would have been all on this guy's
yeah.
side. So it's can't remember his name. I can see his face in my mind. It doesn't matter.
Oh,
It's the other one. It's the junior senator from
he
Utah.
replaced Romney. Yeah, I forgot his name too.
Yeah, it's the guy who replaced Romney. So on this one, he says denaturalize and deport. It's Eileen Gu, right? So this is
An
the
athlete.
Chinese
Yes.
American athlete at the Olympics. Got a lot of fanfare because she chose to represent China instead of the U.S., even though she's a natural born citizen. Her parents are refugees, right, from China, and now she's back representing China. That was distasteful to some on the right, and guess what? It's like, oh, well, we should just deport her. We should denaturalize her and deport her. And it's just, it's just crazy stuff. And then on the final slide,
Wait, I just want to
Tom,
real quick go back to
yeah,
so this guy's name is Ryan Gerdusky. What he said to Mehdi Hassan, the guy on the left here, was, "I
oh
hope
yeah,
your pager doesn't go off," in reference to Mehdi
oh
Hassan.
geez,
So
oh he was that guy.
yeah, that and he was kicked off of CNN, implying that Mehdi, because of his statements, was a member of Hezbollah or something, or supports Hezbollah or supports terrorism. And so it doesn't take much, your support for China in the Olympics, the fact that you decide to take a position against Israel or to decry the pager attack, and these guys won't hesitate to call you a terrorist yourself, even for things that most people would say, okay, that very clearly definitionally not terrorism, not fraud to go and do Olympics for the Chinese Communist Party.
Yeah, and look, we'll talk about this at the end after we get through some of these other tweets.
Yeah.
But I'll talk about what it means to, like, how should a society handle distasteful behavior? How should they handle criminal behavior? Things like that. Like, obviously, I'm against all these things. I don't love that Miss Wu
Yeah,
decided
me
to
neither.
rep China. That's not my vibe. I don't like this. And clearly, she's picking up big checks, which, like, that's not
Yeah.
great.
Especially
This
after
is
we
not
gave
good.
asylum to her
Yeah,
parents. I can
right.
understand. We can all understand the feelings, and that's not up for debate. And we don't like communism. I don't fucking like communism. I don't like radical
No,
Islam. But it's not about that.
no.
It's about what the government should be able to do to people who think that who do things that we find distasteful, and should they be able to do this?
This denaturalization and expulsion, deportation, banishment, penal colony approach to society is rife for abuse by the federal government. And if you think that it will be limited to the distasteful elements of society in your mind, it won't. It'll come for everybody. It's a terrible way to run your country. All right, this is Tom Emmer. So he's the majority whip in the House.
Yep.
Terrorists have no right to US citizenship. If naturalized citizens help fight or help foreign terrorist groups, just help. What does that mean? Does it mean a tweet? Does Tucker Carlson, is he about to have his citizenship stripped and be sent off to a penal colony? I mean, I'm serious. Like, what do they even mean by this? They need to be shipped back to where they came from. Close quote. Eric Schmidt and I introduced the Scam Act to make it easier to denaturalize and deport these monsters. It's common sense and already has 45 House co-sponsors.
This is mainstream Republican. This is not
Yeah,
the
that's
fringe.
leadership.
Yes.
This is leadership. So Representative Andrew Clyde, I'm not worried about being politically correct. Guess what's about to happen, Pisco?
Yeah.
I'm worried about innocent Americans dying at the hands of Islamic terrorists that our country willingly imported and naturalized. Denaturalize, deport, repeat. Okay, Representative Eli Crane, denaturalize and deport. Let's get it done. Crazy that it hasn't always been the law when talking about Eric Schmidt's bill in particular. And a Daily Wire article, again, the relationship between the ecosystem, the online ecosystem of the right, and how it makes its way into the actual halls of power. I just thought that was too on the nose there. That's quite hilarious to me in, like, the worst way possible. And then your best friend, Pisco.
Oh yeah.
And actually why I reached out to you.
Will Chamberlain?
Will Chamberlain, about a year ago.
Yeah. Oh, how did I fucking guess it? Because he always does this, and he doesn't just do it to people who are like horrible terrorists. People. He does it to Hassan Piker.
It to Candace Owens.
He does it to Candace Owens. He did it to Mehdi Hassan. People who just have bad views or views that he doesn't agree with. Like, he will do this on everything. And he actually blocked me after, in response to a Hassan tweet, I had said Hassan clearly didn't commit material support for the Houthis, because at the time that he had this, like, interview with an alleged Houthi who I don't know is a Houthi, at the time he did that, the Houthis weren't even a designated foreign terrorist organization. He blocked me in response to that. So this guy is a hack of the highest order. And what's more is these guys, I have to say it, they're all Israel simps. They're all completely Israel simps. And
okay, yeah, this is true.
And I think that when all of this critique starts to happen with respect to the war in Iran and with criticism of the administration's posture there with Iran, they are desperate to take a hold of the fractures of the Republican Party and find some unifying, animating cause that will distract but be related to the conflict in a way that benefits Israel. And that just has to be said, because these people totally support the war and they want to appeal to the nativist and anti-Muslim sensibilities of their base and raise this issue. I think that is also what's going on here.
Well, anyway, that's the end. You can, if you want to go read Will Chamberlain telling everybody that they should be denaturalized and deported, no matter how long they've been in the country, you can do that on your own time.
We get it.
those five tweets were all within the span of 48 hours, where he's just like going after anybody he doesn't like. And again, it's become a very attractive way for right-wing pundits and elected officials to try to think of an easy way to punish their enemies. So this has become, again, there's a lot of different ways that people in power can try to deal with their perceived enemies. But this is becoming, and it has become, one, if not the preferred way, one of the preferred ways to try to go after people. And that, of course, is very interesting to me. It's very disquieting. I'm an immigration attorney. This is terrible stuff. I don't think that it's going to be contained simply to illegal immigrants. Don't you remember this? Like, oh, we believe in legal immigration, Pisco.
Yeah.
We're just talking about the rapists who break into the country. No, it turns out you mean Candace Owens.
Yeah.
It means totally normal mainstream. Well, she's not normal or mainstream. Maybe that's. So I take that back.
People who are not naturalized citizens. People. Yeah. It is also
these are normal Americans. These are normal people.
And
they
people
don't agree with you.
Yes, exactly. 100%. And so they want to turn issues of disagreement in the public square as issues of membership, as issues of, for the government to sort out winners and losers, as opposed to the people to sort out winners and losers to see who they agree with. So let's back up. Let's introduce the broader discussion. Let's review. So our review of the legal situation is, in general, the Supreme Courts have been incredibly hesitant to extend denaturalization for multiple reasons. For reasons related to conflict of interests of the government and the inherent power of Congress, for reasons related to due process, for reasons related to speech, for reasons related to cruel and unusual punishment. In general, as our review of the case law is, that denaturalization is not allowed except for cases of genuine abandonment, cases of a genuine fraud related to the obtaining of citizenship, but that's pretty much it. That's a review of the case law. That's correct, right?
Yep, that's exactly right.
Okay. And we notice that the introduction of these denaturalization measures has got ahead of steam, that it has support of major Republican figures, and that they're not hiding the ball in terms of their intent to deal more broadly than just fraud and the categorized exceptions, at least in their rhetoric, if not in their proposed law, to be more extensive than just naturalized citizens. And there's nothing, I think, inherently ideologically preventing them, if they wanted to extend the law towards natural-born citizens. And right. Obviously, we have a problem with that. So lay it out for us. What is happening with the Republican Party?
Well, it is starting to. I believe that the unifying pillar that brings all the different factions of the current GOP together is Trump himself. Trump himself has shrunk his circle. He's not stumping for people. He's not handing out. He's not acting like a guy who is interested in running for president again. Like, he loves trolling people about that. But normally, when we saw him do this before, part of this might just be his age, but he's not out on the trail nearly as much. He's holding back nominations to people. He is behaving in some ways that aren't as good for all the other Republicans. His poll numbers are down, right? They were even before the Iran war.
Yep.
And everybody can smell 2028 now, right? The honeymoon's over.
Everyone.
That That period where Trump was able to sort of run roughshod over everybody is winding down. And now what's left inside of the GOP is trying to figure out who's going to be in charge, what comes next. And so people are starting to experiment. And you're seeing the really hardcore right-wing guys experiment with rhetoric and ideas as they start thinking about this election cycle for 2026, but also into the future. And they want to know, does the Groyper approach to politics, does it have staying power? And we're testing that idea right now. That the case is being tested for that right now. I don't think it is. I think that you're seeing really extreme rhetoric in reaction to weakness, not strength, if that makes sense. So when Hitler was at his height of power, he talked about the Jewish cabal the least, if that makes sense. And then when he was sort of thrashing out of control, that's when he started evoking more and more what was going on with the Jewish question, right? Now, I just use that as a parallel. It doesn't track perfectly. But Republicans right now are searching for their voice. What's their issue? It can't be border security, right? The border's quiet. There's not much going on there. So what is their issue? And so they're rhetorically trying to seek out and figure out what that is. What does the post-Trump world look like? What do we really believe in? What's really going on? And I think the far-right guys are trying to stake their claim. They're trying to create primacy. They're getting ahead of Marco Rubio. They're trying to get ahead of J.D. Vance. They're trying to dominate the conversation now. I also think that they're a little bit worried that the party might be over, that by the time you and I are talking 1 year from now, impeachment for multiple people in the administration will have started, that censorship for some of these people that we've read tweets from today might be happening. They may not be able to have their C-SPAN moments and be able to do their podcasting like they want. And so they kind of need to get what's theirs now. And they're trying to hit the furnace while it's hot. And I think there's not some big intellectual anything going on. It's all very vibes, and they're just going with vibes, and they're hoping that something sticks. And that's what I think's going on.
There's so much of what you said that I agree with. I think the part that I most agree with is this vacuum, this space that is coming very soon, if it's not already here. And
Yeah.
I don't know what the phrase is. Something abhors a vacuum, but is it power abhors a vacuum?
Yeah, power absorbs a vacuum.
There's just going to have to be a through line on a winning coalition for Republicans to get power. And Trump, crucially, is old. Trump, crucially, is less engaged on the future of the party. And so there is a need to give some kind of substance, some kind of life, some kind of ideological or some might say personality,
a vision, even
vision,
a vision,
yes,
even
to the future. And listen, it's not unlike some of the struggles that Democrats have had in terms of defining themselves. And this is part of the playbook, is to marginalize outsiders. And maybe this is how it manifests. But it's coming at a time, a very crucial time. Because as you noted, people who would be the presumptive heirs to Trump's legacy ideologically aren't full-throatedly endorsing his recent policies. J.D. Vance, for example, he's having to play a very cagey game, and he's tied down. He's not free to speak in the way some of these people are. Same thing with Marco Rubio. I think that so there's real opportunity here. That's also, I think, what's informing Joe Kent's decision. I don't really believe that Joe Kent has a principled bone in his body. Now, maybe in coordination with JD or some of the other actors he's working with, maybe that's he's trying to make a lane for himself or a lane for others. But this is a purely calculated statement to try to make some space because they see the end of the Trump era. And so the incoming, the prediction about the future of the party, the future of power, is causing a lot of people to try to make a name for themselves right now. And you're seeing that with Tucker. I mean, imagine it would be the best thing for Tucker if the government went after him with some kind of indictment on FARA or some shit like that. And so,
my joke was, if he knows an indictment is coming, he should announce his run for president now.
Yeah.
Let the indictment hit him, and then the GOP people will start to line up. I don't think there's any question.
To the question in the chat, I don't think that Nate has a channel specifically. I appreciate that he says he really enjoys the conversation. But
that's very kind of you. But
yeah, we're really hoping to get him on more, especially when we have the the Supreme Court case. But yeah, respond to that. What I just said about the Republican Party, about its consternations, or whatever else you want to say.
Yeah, it's so hard for me to be able to think. There is a risk that this Iran war situation spirals out of control on market grounds, right? Like that you can't take 15% of the liquid energy on world markets offline and then just walk away like nothing happened. And every day that passes where only tiny little bits of oil are escaping the Middle East, we're having this huge problem that's starting to surge. As Americans, we will not be affected by this as badly, but you'll feel it. Like, just go look at airline prices right now. If you want to fly in April, I think the ticket prices are up 12% right now, above where they were last year. And it's just going to continue to go up. I just use that as an example. There's going to be some like starvation problems in parts of the world, right, that rely on diesel fuel in order to get food from point A to point B in difficult to traverse places. And that's just not going to happen. It's mostly in Asia, and it's going to be really difficult. Why do I mention all this? If the Iran war persists and energy flows continue to break down, whatever's left of globalization is about to collapse on itself. And in that kind of an environment, you could see President Trump's favorability numbers get down into the teens. Like that could really happen. That's on the table. That was not on the table when you and I spoke before. Okay. I mean, I don't know. You might still think maybe you could convince me that the MAGA people will never leave him, but I've started to see in my own life some true MAGA people just throwing up their hands, very frustrated. And now that the gasoline prices are going up, they are pissed. And if that's true, Pisco,
Yeah.
this is then this environment creating that space you were talking about for certain politically minded GOPers and commentators. Now is the time for them to start to distinguish themselves, push back, and not go down with the ship. It's rats fleeing the ship. I really believe that.
So I think that ceiling, or I should say the floor, on Trump's approval is something in the 20s. I really do think that there are, and it's probably the high 20s for me, that something like 28% of the country, 29% of the country are do or die MAGA. Trump is their person. And I think that that's true regardless of the situation financially, that these people are just totally bought in. And that is, I think, concerning about the state of our country. But I don't expect it to go into the teens. But I do think that there is a potential for a nexus moment where the bottom falls under and all the people who are gettable are got with respect to their disapproval of Trump. And why the why the Iran war, I think, is so key to understanding this is, one, the obvious effect it has on policy that you laid out in terms of prices. This automatically will cause certain independent people who care about prices, who were part of the coalition, that the most important issue on the coalition that elected Trump, to throw their hands up, like you said. But it's also about competence. Trump has this veneer of competence that, or at least tries to present himself this way, that he's successful, that he's very, very, very successful. And to the extent that you chip away at that veneer and people start to lose confidence, insiders begin to lose confidence in his track record, or indeed his hold over the party, to the extent that his endorsement doesn't mean as much anymore. That's why I think what's going on in Texas at the Senate race, Paxton versus Cornyn, I don't think it's a riskless calculus for Trump. I think that the endorsement aspect, I think he really wants the senators to buy into, well, if I endorse someone else, you'll drop out, right? And I think that there's some danger if his endorsement means less, or his stranglehold means less. So all that is to say that, yeah, I think that a great deal of change, in addition to the war generally being unpredictable, massive amounts of casualties, let's say if he tries to do some sort of ground invasion of Iran or this Karg island or whatever, I think that could very quickly start to disassemble and start to get out of control, if it's not already.
Yeah. Well, and so your point about this core, let's call it 30%.
Yeah.
There's this core 30% of the electorate that's ride or die Trump. I know there's some polling that's like crazy where MAGA people, right before the bombing started in Iran, were only supportive of bombing Iran at like a 25% level. And then once it started and Trump said this is so
90.
great, it jumped to like 90%. right? So like that's a very powerful piece of evidence that these guys are ride or die all the way to the end. Maybe I still think that they've never really been hit in their pocketbooks with Trump before. Mostly by luck. It just hasn't happened. I still hold on. If you start taking lunch money out of their pockets, they're going to care, but we'll see.
It's in a way that is less immediate to them than the inflation stuff.
Yes,
Like,
that's true.
so a lot of the costs that were borne by consumers or by the American people in the various Trump eras are either he gets cover for it because, like, do you blame Trump for COVID, or they're like tax situations where it's just like opportunity cost lost, or maybe you don't realize it until later. Or for example, even the tariffs will say that's had an effect on prices, but it's more, I think, spread out in terms of its immediate effect than the oil prices. And there's been obviously like all this litigation and different ways that the markets have priced in the tariff effects, even though I think it has been significant overall in the longer term.
That's right.
So
it's
yeah.
that's I would just say, just give it some more time.
Yeah.
Let him cook.
Let him
Pisco,
cook.
let him cook, because the cake that comes out of this thing might just be bitter enough that it starts to erode even that core base. And if that were the case, that's actually very significant if it got that bad. In that scenario, you're going to see the Senate flip. If that were that this year, like if that happens, you could see the Senate flip. And that becomes very interesting. And I don't want to talk about it right now. Mostly it would be you lecturing me because I'm too ignorant. But who would be the Democratic voice if suddenly there was this huge outcry against Trump? The Democratic Party sort of fumbles into huge success. Are we really just going to run back Schumer and Jeffries and like what are we doing? Anyway,
Can't
another
be. No,
conversation for another day.
No. I want to talk about the. I don't know how much time you have. If you have, do you have how much time do you have?
Well, no, I got you 20 minutes. I got you 20 minutes.
I want to talk about the Democrats for a second here, because a lot of the principles that we talked about, constitutionalism, rights, what the framers said, what the Supreme Court is saying, all of that is so base, and I'm so glad when I see statements from Democrats that at least are paying homage or tribute to those values. But I watched the video by this young commentator named Ryan Getty, and what he had to say was that liberalism is marketed, or one of the things he said, I'm not saying that it's a core thing he said, but one of the things I think he intimated was that liberalism has like a problem of selling itself. And here, when I say liberalism, I mean like constitutional liberalism, like not the political liberalism, and that people aren't like connecting it directly to moral issues or deep foundational issues, and it's therefore getting lost in this morass of proceduralism. And so when you hear something like someone like saying, Trump needs to come down and explain to Congress why he's doing this war. Now, you can frame it that way, and I would agree. Like, we want some fucking the administration to be upfront about stuff. But when you ground it in those terms, it's like, oh, well, I'm okay with it if he just comes to Congress, or if that's the impression that some people can have. You're not giving the same sense of an ideological purpose of he's stealing power from the Congress. He is, undermining sovereignty. This is about sovereignty, about who controls when we go to war. The people decided to give that to a given body and not to the president. And indeed, when we're talking about Trump's threats, when you couch it in terms of, due process, is that really landing? And so I think there needs to be a positive vision by Democrats that keeps true to liberal principles, that invokes them, but that packages them in a coherent vision, and without giving ground, by the way, on things like immigration. I think Democrats have been playing scared and, like we said, cagey, and haven't really offered an alternative. Like, so if someone were to come up to a Democrat and say what was just said or what we looked at in the tweets, I think like 80% will be like, that's racist, bro. That's racist, bro. And it would like stop there. Like, he's a bigot. He's a bigot. He's a bigot. And I think there needs to be a so what to that, and a so what to that affects, well, no, it's not just about the Muslims. It's about you. It's about you, average American. This is all about you. These rights are about your rights. And I don't know what that looks like, that coherent vision. And obviously it needs to include some policy stuff, but I'll let you respond.
Yeah, I don't even know what to respond to that, because I've told you before, maybe it was offline, I don't even know, but there needs to be a community-based, patriotic message, I believe, that comes out of the left to take advantage of this moment that might be gifted to them by this GOP nonsense. And to your point about liberalism, the the set of ideas, the package of, I prefer saying Enlightenment
Sure,
ideas
sure.
instead of liberalism. But the Enlightenment values are not great pillars for community building.
Yeah.
They're just not. I mean, sort of to your point, the so what? So it's like, that's racist, bro. Accurate. Good job. That is totally true.
Mhm.
So now what? And I think that if somebody were to say, so, well, what do you think about the fact that 4 different Muslim men have tried to do violent acts in
Yeah.
response to the war?
What's your response to that,
Like, what
Mr.
do you
Democrat?
do?
Yeah.
Yeah, like, what shouldn't I, as a citizen, be able to say, I would really like to address that issue?
Yeah.
And right now, the answer is like, well, we're just not going to do it the racist way. Well, okay, Mamdani's tried to do some stuff. I feel like he has a voice. I do. I
Yeah.
feel like he has a voice. I feel like he can show that some of the basic ideas that we've been talking about can flow into a narrative, into a feeling of I don't even know what the word is, but like belonging into a community. I think he's going to do really well. I don't know. How close are you to New York without doxing yourself?
I'm
Are
in
you
New York.
nearby?
I'm in the
Oh,
city.
okay, yeah.
He's
So
my
you tell
mayor.
me. Yeah, so
His
Mamdani's
polling
your
has
mayor.
gone up. The reason why I like Mamdani right now, among other reasons, is he speaks frankly.
Yeah.
So this isn't necessarily even about the message, and we should get to that. About what the substantive message is, but how one speaks sometimes even is more important than what you say. The medium is the message, how you communicate is the message. So when
Yeah.
you see, for example, these kids throwing snowballs at the police, immediately addresses it and says, and has like an appropriate, tailored, measured response that just speaks frankly. When he talks about the terrorist attempted attack that occurred with this Jake Lang guy, who incidentally
Yeah.
I think has gotten himself into a little trouble with the decoy, like spoofed 15-year-old or whatever. That was weird. But he was just like this kind of, he named the problem. He named it. That is a form of Islamic terrorism, and he wasn't scared about it. He wasn't scared about hemming and hawing.
Yeah.
I think so much of people like Graham Plattner, who I don't like for a bunch of reasons, but did endorse. People like, let me think of others who just kind of speak frankly. James Tallarico. I think that there's a frankness about them and like a kind of calmness in that they're willing to address things head on, and not just avoid the issue. I don't know if you saw, this is from the Republican context, but Lisa Murkowski was asked about the SAVE Act, and she just looks very cagey, like she's avoiding it, and I can tell Republicans don't like that. Susan Collins was asked about Israel. She also like just looks like she's wanting to dodge the question. And so I think it's a new era, and there needs to be a quiet confidence and a willingness to speak frankly. It doesn't mean swearing after every word and being inauthentic, but coming across like you're like a normal person, I think, is a good first step.
Yeah, that's also just sort of millennial vibes, right? Our
Yeah,
generation kind of brings that particular, I don't know, aesthetic. Can you use aesthetic in how you speak?
100%.
Maybe I don't know,
And it's
but
totally
yeah,
missing among Schumer and I mean Jeffries.
that's what
Sometimes,
I mean.
yes, yeah,
That's exactly what I mean. I mean, like, look, guys, if we're just going to if the country is about to hand significant power to Schumer and Jeffries, I'm sure that, like, I would hope that they would make good decisions for the country. Whatever. I'm not really a Democrat. That's not the point. But even just the way in which they talk, you know me, I believe in the woundedness of our country right now.
yeah.
There are deep wounds in our country. There are people who are truly freaked out. They probably shouldn't be, but they are. And these deep wounds need to be addressed. And the generations ahead of the millennials have just done such a poor job at showing up on these topics. The Gen X people, Vice President Harris was unable to deliver a message. I can't name anyone in their 50s right now who's a good spokesperson for a more healing kind of a politics. People in their 60s and above, they're still fighting the wars of the 80s. Like, they're still ticked. Like, in a lot of ways, this Iran war is being run by a guy who was mad at Iran in the 80s.
100%. If you listen to Trump's speech, he invokes the hostage crisis. It's
Yeah,
almost like he's trying to be like the response to Jimmy Carter.
yeah. Like, when I heard the GOP talking points of like, oh, this is a 47-year war, I'm literally thinking, yeah, and you think it's year one, right?
Yeah.
You're fighting it like it's year one. This isn't year 47. You're approaching it as year one. So I just have this concern where I'm like, all right, we're about to hand off enormous power. I believe, again, I could be wrong, but I think enormous power politically is about to transfer. It's going to be ugly. We could talk about what that means.
Yeah.
Are some of the Groyper types going to take that laying down? Are there some people who are on the fringes of society who lean right who are going to take that laying down? Probably not. There's some danger to that, right? But I would predict that there's a big transfer of power. And if it's just, Schumer 4.0, 5.0, like, I don't know, man, then I would anticipate that the power will try to flow right back, right?
Yeah.
After another couple of election cycles. And so I'm deeply concerned by that. I hope that whether it comes from the right or the left, there is some sort of politics of healing or at least of solidarity that can actually stand up with some principles. But man, the only people on the right who seem to be spewing principles, the organizing principle is punish the bads, the Browns, the whoever's, punish those guys. We went from trigger the libs to punish the libs. That seems to be the new mantra of the right. And that is, I mean, that will wreck our country. We will be miserable if we go that path. So I really need Democrats to stand up and give us a path. So when the transfer of power occurs, you might keep the House for 40, 50 years, like FDR, right?
Yeah, no, I sort of totally see what you're saying, and I agree so much. And one of the reasons why Gavin Newsom is not my top candidate is because I don't know that he's operating with principle and
Yeah.
or with some sort of core ideological, politics of healing, politics of
Yep.
solidarity.
I
And
want to I want to
yeah,
underscore this because I think this is important because of course Gavin is set up from like an organizational money
yeah,
name recognition perspective to be the guy. I think that that's his weakness. He's the guy that needed to happen in 2016, if
yeah.
that makes sense.
No, I
Like,
think that makes sense. Yeah,
yeah, it's like, hey, that was exactly what probably could have risen to the moment and defeated Trump in 2016. We're just late. Like that, it's been 12, by the time this thing is over, it will have been a full 12 years. And I think he's already missed his moment, right? I mean, from
I think that I don't think it's likely that he'll be the nominee, but I think he has a decent chance. But I think more likely than not, it won't be him. But I do still think he, by the way, though, he has a decent chance. But to elaborate, I think that Newsom has an X factor when it comes to charisma and communication. But so often we have that mismatch between that we have one but not the other, right? We have the principle but no Riz or X factor,
yeah,
or we have Riz and X factor, but the principle, if it exists, we can't see it, or for whatever reason it's lacking. And so for Gavin specifically, I think that he's showing that he's learned that he can be taught. He's showing that he can change. That's huge for me. The fact that you can see something, see a problem, and change what you're doing, change in response to the problem. But it can't happen in a way, I think, or it needs to be met with some commitment to an actual sort of ideology, an actual sort of a vision, like I said. And those people oftentimes are quieter or don't have the same kind of ambition. When I just reference
right.
politics of healing, I want to be clear for my audience because we had this conversation about like punishment accountability. I do think that punishment accountability for the MAGA administration is part of that healing process and needs to happen. But ultimately, it is not a good situation that we're in when we oscillate between these like entirely incompatible visions of what America is, where you have one half of the aisle talking in the terms that we just showed you in a way that's, I think, totally anti-constitutional. Like that is not a good state for our country to be in.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I don't know what happens next. So we left our conversation last time with a couple of good quotes for some really good films.
Yeah,
And we kind of left on this like, okay, and you made this prediction that there would be the next domino to fall would be to go after citizenship for just generalized political enemies.
yeah,
That's happened. I don't know what the next domino is. I think a lot of things are just in flux right now. I think as we get into the spring and summer months in America, generally vibes get a lot better. Just as a general proposition,
yeah.
sun's out, guns out, right? Like this kind of idea.
There's also
And
more
so I
crime
think,
that happens when it's hot, though. Just keep that in mind.
well, yeah, that's right. People get
Mhm.
out, but it actually just shows that people are out. There's just more human to human contact. That's why
Yeah,
crimes happen,
yeah,
right?
no, no,
And so
100%.
yeah, and so I would hope, but to me, it's all about the fall, not just because of the elections, but because if you go back and look throughout history, markets get strained at the beginning of spring. So if you were just go say where of the 25 or so recessions that America has experienced, like 3 or 4 of them have started in the spring. 0 of them have started in the summer. We've never had a recession in the summer in the United States start. Like, we might be stuck in one, but the summer months are always good, always. Even during the Great Depression, the summer months did really well. Stock market's always up in July. It's September, October. Like, September and October are rough. And we're going into an election cycle. I think Trump has really mismanaged the economy over the last 18 months. I think some of the fruit of that is going to start to bear. And I'm very concerned for this fall. And then, of course, I'm concerned for the fall of 2028. And I just hope that there will be some voices that are about healing and a little bit about feelings, but mostly about healing and good policy. That's what I hope for. I don't have a lot of hope, but
Yeah, no,
that is my hope.
I think that you should be correct. If we're talking about predictions, this is what I think. I think that you should be correct to be concerned in the next, in this next year. I think this is crunch time. Now, I have been very open that I'm optimistic and white pilled that our country will go through it, but this is why I think that the next months will be rough. I think that Trump has shown, based on his personality, it's a personality analysis, that his hunger doesn't get satiated with the eating. That is to say, he will, I think, continue to make moves internationally, and it just won't end in Iran. I think that they have an eye towards Cuba. I think that they want to impose their will elsewhere, and that Trump is really, as he sees support collapse among his polling, as he sees things not going his way, he is going to double, triple, quadruple, quintuple down, and we should expect to see additional depravities, additional foreign war efforts, maybe an attempt to get out of NATO, certainly
Cuba.
an attempt to, Cuba. I mean, this illegal blockade of Cuba, I think, is definitely concerning, and so we should. I do think that things are going to get way worse in the next 5-6 months as we get into the election. Now, I don't think it will ultimately be sufficient to end the election or end democracy, but I do think that we should expect to see that, and that's why we have to be on guard. Now, the question will be, what are Democrats' response to what's happening? And I think ultimately there needs to be a unified opposition,
Yeah.
but that can't be all that it is. It can't just be opposition. We need to plan for the next day, and sooner or later, the Democrats are going to have to decide what that vision is, and that's why I'm encouraged by the fact that a lot of these conversations, that the party is self-reflective in a way and self-conscious in a way that sometimes I feel the Republican Party is not. But if there are not those voices to try to, I think, change direction from the Schumers and Jeffries of the world, I think that we're in trouble if we just try the same thing.
Well, on that cheery note, I'll say again, thank you, Pisco. This has been a lot of fun. It's great to be able to shout into the void. I hope that the audience liked it enough.
They loved it.
And we'll talk soon, I think. Maybe.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Maybe the world will end. Who knows?
When the argument comes up for the Wong Kim Ark decision, for the birthright decision, we should get in touch. But I appreciate you coming on, teaching us stuff about denaturalization, and of course, thank you so much for joining.
Appreciate you. We'll see you.